A dying military dog uncovered a secret beneath a dead orchard that exposed a billionaire's 20-year lie. They laughed at a homeless Navy SEAL's dead peach orchard. His dog found why it bloomed. The laughter started the moment the judge announced the inheritance. A homeless Navy SEAL, living from a rusted pickup with his aging German shepherd, had just inherited a dead peach orchard high in the Colorado mountains. The land was supposedly worthless. The trees hadn't bloomed in years. But while everyone else saw failure, the old military dog kept returning to the same forgotten corner of the orchard, as if he knew a secret buried beneath the roots could change everything. Comment 1 if you think Ethan should trust his dog, or 0 if you would have taken the money. Tell us where you're watching from. I still remember the sound of the laughter. Not because it was loud, because it wasn't. It started with a single chuckle somewhere behind me. Then another, then a few more, and within seconds the entire courtroom in Silver Ridge, Colorado, sounded like a room full of people who had just heard the funniest joke of their lives. The joke was me. My name is Ethan Cole. I am 62 years old. I served 27 years as a Navy SEAL. I survived combat deployments on 3 continents. I survived gunfire. I survived explosions. I survived losing men whose names I still whisper in my sleep. But standing in that courtroom on a cold October morning, wearing a second-hand coat that smelled faintly of gasoline, and sleeping in a rusted pickup truck parked behind a grocery store, I had never felt smaller. Beside me sat the only soul left in the world who still belonged to me. Shadow, a retired military German shepherd. His black and tan fur had begun turning gray around the muzzle. The scars on his body matched many of the scars on mine. He sat quietly at my feet, alert but calm, watching the room with the same discipline that had once kept both of us alive overseas. He didn't understand wills, or inheritance, or courtrooms. But he understood people, and he understood when people were laughing at his partner. His ears flattened slightly. That was the first sign. The second was the low rumble deep inside his chest. Not a growl, a warning. The kind he used to give when danger approached. I reached down and rested a hand on his neck. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, though neither of us believed it. Outside, snow clouds hung over the San Juan Mountains. The peaks rose beyond the courthouse windows like silent stone giants. Silver Ridge was one of those mountain towns that looked beautiful in photographs and lonely in real life. Old brick buildings, weathered storefronts, pickup trucks lined along Main Street. A place where everyone knew everyone, which made it the worst possible place for a stranger to become a public spectacle. Especially a homeless stranger. The judge adjusted his glasses. The attorney beside me shuffled a stack of papers. His name was Randall Pierce. 2 weeks earlier, he had tracked me down in the parking lot of a truck stop outside Durango. At first, I thought he was a debt collector. Then I thought he was mistaken. People didn't spend weeks searching for homeless veterans. Not unless something had gone terribly wrong. "Mr. Cole," he had said, "I have been trying to find you for months. Nobody had looked for me in years. That should have been my first clue. Now here I was, sitting in a courtroom, trying to understand why." The judge cleared his throat. "The estate of Nathan Briggs." The room became quiet. I stared at the polished wood floor. Nathan Briggs. Commander Briggs. The man who had once saved my life. The man who had turned scared young recruits into warriors. The man I hadn't spoken to in almost 8 years. He was dead. Even now, it didn't feel real. I remembered his voice, his laugh. The way he always carried himself like every problem in the world could be solved if people simply stopped complaining and got to work. Nathan Briggs had been larger than life. The idea that he could die felt impossible. The judge continued reading. Former resident of Silver Ridge. A few heads nodded. People knew who Nathan had been. Apparently, everyone in town knew him. Everyone except me. Because while they had watched him grow old here in the mountains, I had been falling apart. The last 3 years of my life had disappeared into a blur. My wife, Caroline, died after a sudden illness. The medical bills took everything. The business failed, the house followed, friends vanished, family drifted away. PT filled every crack that grief left behind. Eventually it was just me and Shadow, living day to day, one parking lot at a time, one sleepless night at a time, one memory at a time. The judge reached the section everyone had been waiting for. The entirety of the estate shall transfer to Ethan Cole. Murmurs spread through the room. I looked up. For a brief moment, something dangerous stirred inside me. Hope. I hated hope. Hope had teeth. Hope always found a way to bite. But I couldn't stop myself. Nathan Briggs had been successful, smart, respected. What exactly had he left me? The judge adjusted his papers again. Included in the estate are the following assets. Silence settled over the room. Then he began reading. One abandoned farmhouse located on Briggs Orchard Road. I frowned. Farmhouse? One barn structure deemed unsafe for agricultural use. More confusion. Then came the final line. One peach orchard consisting of approximately 240 acres of dormant peach trees. The room remained silent for about 3 seconds. Then someone laughed. Another joined, then another, and another, until the entire courtroom erupted. I sat frozen. The words echoed inside my head. Peach orchard, farmhouse, barn. That was it? That was everything? The judge continued. The county appraisal currently values the property at $17,400. The laughter grew louder. A woman covered her mouth. A man in the back shook his head. Someone muttered, "Poor guy. $17,000. 240 acres. That alone should have sounded impossible. But apparently the orchard had been dead for years. The farmhouse was falling apart. The land generated no income. No crops, no business, nothing. The inheritance wasn't a blessing. It was a burden. The laughter slowly faded. Then a chair scraped against the floor. A man stood, tall, well-dressed, expensive boots, expensive coat. The kind of confidence money builds over decades. He smiled before he even reached the front of the room. That smile told me everything. Victor Hale. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew his type. I'd met versions of him my entire life. Men who walked into rooms already convinced they owned them. "Your Honor," he said. The judge nodded. Victor stepped forward. The entire courtroom seemed to shift around him. People paid attention. That told me something too. Influence, power, maybe both. He stopped directly in front of me, looked me up and down. His eyes lingered on my worn boots, my faded coat, the frayed sleeves, the homeless veteran. Then he glanced at Shadow. The smile weakened slightly. Shadow stared back. Victor looked away first, interesting. "Mr. Cole," he said. His voice carried the smooth confidence of a salesman. "I'd like to make you an offer." The courtroom became silent again. Everyone wanted to hear this. Victor reached into his jacket pocket, produced an envelope, thick, heavy, cash. "I'll save you the trouble." He held out the envelope, $25,000. The room stirred. My attorney looked surprised. Victor continued. "Cash." He smiled again. "You sign the property over today." I stared at him. He shrugged. "Let's be honest." His voice softened, almost sympathetic. "You're not a farmer." A few people chuckled. Victor continued. "The orchard's dead. The farmhouse is collapsing. The land hasn't produced anything in over 15 years. He glanced toward the windows. "Winter's coming." Then he looked back at me. "Take the money." His smile widened. "Get yourself a fresh start." The courtroom waited. I looked at the envelope. $25,000. For someone living out of a pickup truck. It might as well have been $1 million. A warm apartment, medical care, food, a future. Everything I no longer had. My fingers tightened. Not on the money, on Shadow's collar. Something felt wrong, very wrong. Because Nathan Briggs wasn't a fool. Nathan Briggs didn't spend his life making stupid decisions. And if everyone in this room believed the property was worthless, then why was Victor Hale trying so hard to buy it before I had even seen it? I looked up. For the first time, our eyes met properly. Victor's smile never changed, but something cold lived behind it. Something patient, something calculating. I had seen that look before. In war zones, in negotiations, in men hiding motives. The courtroom disappeared. The laughter disappeared, the noise disappeared, and one question remained. Why? Why did Victor Hale want this land so badly? I slowly stood. The room watched. Victor held out the envelope, waiting, confident. I looked at the cash, then at him, then at Shadow. The old dog rose beside me, steady, loyal, ready, just like always. Finally, I spoke. I'd like to see the property first. Victor blinked. The smile faltered. Just for a moment, just long enough. And in that tiny crack, I knew. There was something on that mountain nobody was telling me. Something Nathan Briggs wanted me to find. Something Victor Hale desperately wanted me to miss. For the first time in years, I felt something stronger than grief. Stronger than fear, curiosity, and somewhere far beyond the courthouse windows, hidden beneath snow-covered mountains and rows of dead peach trees. The answer was waiting. I just didn't know it yet. The morning after the hearing, I pointed my rusted pickup north and left Silver Ridge behind. Snow flurries drifted across the windshield. The mountains rose higher with every mile. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, his ears alert, his nose pressed occasionally against the cold glass, as if he were studying the landscape ahead. The envelope containing the property documents rested on the dashboard. I had read them 3 times during the night. The details hadn't improved. 240 acres, abandoned farmhouse, collapsed barn, dead orchard, no income, no employees, no equipment, nothing. And yet Victor Hale had offered $25,000 without hesitation. That fact bothered me more than I wanted to admit. A man like Victor Hale didn't throw money at worthless land, not unless he knew something everyone else didn't. The road narrowed as I climbed higher into the San Juan Mountains. Pine forests swallowed the highway. The sky darkened beneath thick clouds. A storm was building somewhere, beyond the ridges. I could feel it. After years of sleeping outdoors, weather had become something I sensed in my bones. Around noon, I passed the last gas station, the last grocery store, the last sign of civilization. Then there was only wilderness, towering mountains, frozen streams, rock faces dusted with snow. The kind of country that made a man feel very small, or very free. Sometimes both. The directions eventually led me onto a narrow gravel road. The sign at its entrance leaned sideways. Most of the paint had peeled away. Only 2 words remained visible. Briggs Orchard. I slowed the truck. Shadow sat upright immediately. His ears lifted. A low sound escaped his throat. Not a growl, not a bark, something closer to recognition. I glanced at him. "What is it, buddy?" His eyes remained fixed ahead. The gravel road twisted upward through dense pine trees. Snow covered the ground beneath them. The higher we climbed, the deeper it became. Branches creaked in the wind. The forest seemed ancient, silent, watchful. 10 minutes later, the trees opened, and I saw it. The orchard. At first, I thought the landscape had been burned. Rows upon rows of black shapes stretched across the mountainside. Hundreds of trees, leafless, motionless. Standing against these, the white snow like an army of skeletons. The sight stopped me cold. I pulled the truck onto the shoulder. Neither Shadow nor I moved. The orchard covered the entire slope. Gray branches reached toward the winter sky, twisted, lifeless. The trees looked dead, not dormant, dead. Every newspaper photograph, every county report, every joke in that courtroom suddenly made sense. This wasn't an orchard, it was a graveyard. The wind swept across the mountain. The trees swayed slightly. For a brief moment they almost looked alive. Then the illusion vanished. I exhaled slowly. So this is it. Shadow stared at the orchard. Then something strange happened. His tail moved once, just once. The first sign of interest I'd seen from him all day. A few minutes later, we continued climbing. The farmhouse appeared near the top of the ridge. Calling it a farmhouse felt generous. The place looked exhausted. Weathered wood siding, sagging porch, broken shutters, a stone chimney leaning slightly to one side. Snow drifted against the walls. The structure looked like it had spent years fighting the mountain and was losing. Nearby stood a barn, or what remained of one. Part of the roof had collapsed. One wall leaned inward. The entire structure looked ready to surrender to gravity. I parked beside the house. The engine died. Silence settled around us. The kind of silence you only find in remote places. No traffic, no voices, no city noise, just wind and mountains and distance. Shadow jumped out first. He landed lightly despite his age, then immediately began exploring. His nose moved constantly, studying scents, reading invisible stories hidden in the air. I stepped from the truck. Cold mountain wind hit my face. The temperature had dropped sharply. Winter wasn't coming. Winter was already here. The porch groaned beneath my weight. I opened the front door. The smell hit first. Dust, old wood, cold stone, abandonment. The interior was darker than expected. One large living room, a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, a staircase leading upstairs. Most of the furniture was gone. The few pieces that remained sat beneath white sheets, like ghosts waiting patiently for someone to return. I walked through every room, checking windows, checking walls, checking structural damage. Old habits die hard. A seal learns quickly that survival begins with understanding terrain. Even if the terrain is a farmhouse. The place was rough, but not hopeless. The roof leaked in several places. The plumbing looked questionable. Half the windows needed repair. Yet somehow the house remained standing. Nathan Briggs had chosen this place for a reason. I just couldn't see it. Not yet. A sudden bark echoed outside. Shadow. I stepped onto the porch. The dog stood nearly 50 yards away, near the center rows of the orchard, motionless, watching something. I walked toward him. Snow crunched beneath my boots. The trees towered around us. Their twisted branches cast long shadows across the ground. When I reached him, Shadow didn't move. He simply stared at a particular section of trees. Row after row, identical to the rest. Nothing unusual, nothing obvious. "What are you looking at?" He glanced briefly toward me, then returned his attention to the orchard. I studied the area, saw nothing. Eventually, I shrugged and headed back toward the house. Shadow followed, but twice he looked back, as if reluctant to leave. That night I built a fire. The old fireplace still worked, surprisingly well. Orange flames danced across stone walls. Heat slowly pushed back the mountain cold. For the first time in months, I slept indoors. It should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt strange, too quiet, too still. Around midnight, the dreams came. They always came. Some nights they arrived as fragments. Some nights they arrived whole. This one arrived whole. Afghanistan. Gunfire. Dust. A convoy. A roadside explosion. The sound. The screaming. The smoke. Faces. Names. Memories I spent years trying to bury. I woke suddenly. Heart racing. Breathing hard. The fire had nearly gone out. The room sat in darkness. Shadow lifted his head from beside the hearth. His eyes reflected the dying embers. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he crossed the room and rested his head against my knee. The pressure grounded me, pulled me back, away from old battlefields, away from ghosts. I scratched behind his ears, still watching my back. His tail tapped once against the floor. Outside, wind howled across the mountain. Snow struck the windows. The storm had arrived. Morning brought white skies and deeper drifts. The mountain seemed even more isolated, like the rest of the world had vanished overnight. I spent the day patching broken windows with scrap lumber, repairing hinges, cleaning rooms, trying not to think about how much work remained. Several times I noticed Shadow wandering toward the orchard. Always the same direction, always the same section, never far, just watching, waiting. The behavior repeated over the following days, and the more it happened, the more curious I became. One afternoon, while hauling firewood, I spotted movement on the road below. A black SUV. Victor Hale. Even from a distance, I recognized him. The vehicle climbed slowly toward the farmhouse. My stomach tightened. The man stepped out wearing the same expensive coat, the same confident smile. He glanced around the property, then at me, then at Shadow. "You're still here." I leaned against the woodpile. "For now," Victor smiled. The smile never reached his eyes. "You'll change your mind." I didn't answer. He walked a few steps farther, surveying the orchard, studying it, not admiring, studying. Like a man examining something he believed already belonged to him. Interesting. Very interesting. Finally, he looked back. My offer still stands. Not interested. His smile faded slightly. Winter gets ugly up here. I've seen ugly. A brief silence followed. Then Victor nodded. Think about it. He climbed back into the SUV. Before leaving, his gaze drifted across the orchard one final time. Not toward the farmhouse, not toward the barn, the orchard. That told me everything. Or at least enough. The dead trees mattered. The question was why. As the SUV disappeared down the mountain road, Shadow stepped beside me. Both of us watched it go. Then the old dog turned, without hesitation, without distraction, and once again walked toward the exact same section of the orchard. This time, I followed him. Shadow moved slowly through the snow-covered orchard, not wandering, not exploring, following a route, the same route. His nose stayed low to the ground as he weaved between rows of dead peach trees. The winter wind whispered through bare branches overhead. Snowflakes drifted from a sky the color of steel. Everything about the orchard felt lifeless, and yet Shadow behaved as if he were searching for something alive. I watched him stop near a cluster of trees roughly halfway down the slope. He stood perfectly still, ears forward, body tense, focused. I walked around the area, studied the ground, examined the trees. Nothing, no tracks, no markers, no signs, just dead trees and snow. Eventually, Shadow turned and followed me back toward the farmhouse. But one thing stayed with me. Military dogs don't develop obsessions without a reason. They notice things humans miss, smells, patterns, changes, threats. Years ago, trusting Shadow had saved my life. More than once. The thought followed me through the rest of the afternoon, and through the long winter that came afterward. Because winter arrived with a vengeance. Within 2 weeks, the mountain disappeared beneath nearly 3 feet of snow. The road into town became nearly impassable. The orchard vanished beneath white drifts. The world shrank to a few hundred yards around the farmhouse. The mountain became its own universe. And inside that universe, there was only me and Shadow. The first month was harder than I expected. The house held heat poorly. Every morning began with chopping wood. Every evening ended with hauling more inside. I repaired windows, patched leaks, reinforced doors. The work kept my hands busy. Unfortunately, it couldn't keep my mind busy enough. The nights were worse. The nights always were. Sleep had become an enemy years ago. The darkness carried memories. Sometimes they arrived as sounds. A helicopter rotor, a distant explosion, a voice calling for help. Other times they arrived as faces, men whose names I still remembered, men who never came home. The farmhouse seemed to amplify everything, the isolation, the silence, the memories. One night in December, the storm outside became so violent the entire house shook. Wind screamed around the roof. Snow hammered the walls. The old windows rattled continuously. I sat beside the fireplace watching flames dance across the stone. Shadow slept nearby. For a moment, everything felt calm. Then the memory came, without warning. 1 second I was in Colorado. The next I was back in Afghanistan. Dust, heat, gunfire, the smell of burning metal. A convoy trapped inside a canyon. I could hear shouting, could hear my own voice issuing commands, could hear someone screaming my name. The memory felt real, more real than the room around me. My breathing accelerated, my chest tightened. I stood abruptly, the chair tipped backward, the fireplace blurred, the farmhouse disappeared. I was back there, back in the war, back in the nightmare. Somewhere inside the fog of panic, I grabbed a burning piece of firewood from the hearth. My hands didn't know where they were. My mind didn't know where I was. Only the danger felt real. Only survival mattered. Then Shadow hit me hard. The German Shepherd slammed into my side with enough force to send both of us crashing onto the floor. The burning log rolled harmlessly across the stone. I blinked. The room returned. Colorado. Farmhouse. Winter. Not Afghanistan. Not war. Not death. Shadow stood over me, breathing heavily, watching my face, waiting. The same way he had done overseas whenever explosions rattled too close. The same way he had done when panic attacks first started after Caroline died. He knew. Somehow he always knew. I sat there for a long time, the fire crackling quietly, the storm raging outside, one hand resting against Shadow's neck. "Thank you." The words barely escaped my mouth. The old dog lowered himself beside me. Neither of us moved for the rest of the night. A week later, someone knocked on my door. The sound startled me. Almost nobody came up the mountain, especially during winter. I opened the door carefully. A cardboard box sat on the porch. No person, no vehicle, nothing. Just the box. Inside were canned vegetables, bread, coffee, 2 jars of soup, and a handwritten note. "Stay warm." Grace, that was all. No last name, no explanation, no request. Just kindness. The gesture unsettled me more than it should have, because kindness had become unfamiliar. The next delivery came 4 days later. Then another. Eventually, I learned who Grace was. Grace Whitaker, a widow who lived near the edge of town. Apparently, she had known Nathan Briggs for years. The notes never became longer. The supplies never became extravagant, but they arrived regularly. Enough to help, never enough to feel like charity. The balance was perfect. Nathan would have appreciated that. Christmas arrived buried beneath snow. The mountain looked beautiful. White forests, frozen streams, silver peaks stretching endlessly beneath clear blue skies. Tourists probably would have called it magical. For me, it felt lonely. The first Christmas without Caroline had broken me. The second had nearly finished the job. This one felt different, not easier, just quieter. Shadow and I spent the day walking through the orchard. The snow reached nearly to my knees. The trees cast long shadows across the hillside. Everything stood frozen, waiting, the same way it had been waiting for years. As we reached the familiar section Shadow always visited, he stopped again. The dog stood motionless, studying the same area, the same trees, the same ground. I crouched beside him. "What are you trying to tell me?" His ears twitched. His eyes remained fixed ahead. The answer didn't come, at least not yet. January brought new problems. Food costs, repairs, bills. Money disappeared faster than I liked. Victor Hale seemed to know exactly when my situation became difficult, because one afternoon his black SUV appeared again. Snow sprayed behind the tires as he climbed the driveway. I watched from the porch, already irritated. Victor climbed out wearing another expensive coat. He looked entirely too comfortable for someone standing in the middle of a mountain winter. "You look cold," he said. "I am cold," he laughed. Then he handed me a business card. The amount written on the back made me pause. $40,000, nearly double his original offer. Winter changes perspectives. I handed the card back. "No." Victor studied me. The smile faded. "Why?" The question surprised me, because it sounded genuine, as if he truly didn't understand. I looked beyond him toward the orchard. Rows of dead trees stretched across the mountain. I had no logical answer, no financial answer, no practical answer. Yet something kept me here. Maybe curiosity, maybe stubbornness, maybe Nathan Briggs. I don't know yet. Victor's jaw tightened. That answer bothered him. "Good, you're making a mistake, maybe. The orchard's dead." I glanced toward the trees. "Then why do you want it so badly?" The question landed harder than I expected. Victor's expression changed, only slightly, but enough. The same reaction I'd seen in the courtroom. A crack. A tiny crack. Then it vanished. "The land has development potential." The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. I didn't believe him. Neither did Shadow. The dog stepped forward. Victor immediately took a step back. Interesting. Very interesting. A moment later, Victor climbed into the SUV and drove away. The mountain swallowed the vehicle. The silence returned, but the conversation lingered. Development potential. Maybe, maybe not. One thing felt increasingly obvious. Victor wasn't telling the truth. February arrived. Then more snow, more isolation, more waiting. Yet through everything, Shadow's behavior continued. Every single day. Same section of orchard, same trees, same watchful focus. The obsession never weakened. If anything, it became stronger. Then one evening, I noticed something new. The dog wasn't only watching the orchard anymore. He was watching the farmhouse, specifically the fireplace. At first, I ignored it. The old stone fireplace sat at the center of the house, nothing unusual about it. But Shadow kept returning, watching, sniffing, studying, the same way he studied the orchard. One night he even pawed at the stones near the base, not aggressively, just enough to catch my attention. I frowned. Looking for mice? His ears flicked. The answer seemed almost offended. The following morning he returned to the fireplace, again, then again that night, then again the next day. Always focused, always curious. Something had changed, and whatever it was, Shadow had noticed before I had. Outside, winter still ruled the mountain. Snow covered the orchard. The trees remained silent. The wind continued whispering through dead branches. Yet somewhere beneath all that silence, something was beginning to move, and Shadow could feel it. The question was whether I was willing to trust him. For most of my life, the answer would have been easy. Yes, absolutely, without hesitation. In combat, hesitation got people killed. A military working dog wasn't a pet. He was a teammate, a partner, a second set of eyes, a second brain. There had been times overseas when Shadow detected danger minutes before any human noticed it. Those minutes had saved lives, mine included. Yet somehow, sitting in an old farmhouse in the Colorado mountains, I kept telling myself he was probably chasing mice. By late February, even I stopped believing that. The behavior had become impossible to ignore. Every morning, Shadow visited the fireplace. Every evening, he returned. He sniffed the same stones, pawed at the same section, studied it with a level of focus that bordered on obsession. Then one morning, I woke to the sound of scraping, stone against claw. I opened my eyes. Gray dawn filtered through the frost-covered windows. The fire had burned low during the night, and Shadow was already working. His front paws scratched furiously at the base of the fireplace. Bits of dirt scattered across the floor. Small pieces of mortar crumbled loose. I sat up. "What in the world are you doing?" The dog didn't even look at me. That alone got my attention. Normally, one word from me broke his concentration. Not this time. His entire focus remained fixed on the stonework. I climbed out of bed, walked across the room, kneeled beside him. The fireplace appeared exactly as it always had. Old stones, old mortar, dust, nothing unusual. Then I noticed something. One stone near the lower corner looked slightly different. Its edges weren't worn like the others. The color varied slightly, not enough to stand out at first glance, but enough. I ran my fingers across it. The surface felt smoother, newer, or perhaps replaced. A strange feeling settled in my stomach, the same feeling I used to get before discovering something important, a clue, a detail everyone else overlooked. I stood, fetched a flashlight, then examined the fireplace more carefully. The stone wasn't original. Neither was some of the mortar around it. Someone had repaired this section at some point, deliberately, carefully, and apparently they wanted it to blend in. My pulse quickened slightly. Shadow watched me now, tail moving once, as if he had been waiting for me to catch up. "All right, partner." I grabbed a pry bar from my toolbox. "Let's see what you've found." The work took hours. The old mortar resisted. The stone refused to move. More than once I nearly gave up. But Shadow never left. He sat nearby, watching, waiting. By afternoon I finally heard it, a hollow sound different from the rest. I froze, tapped again. Same result. The space behind the stone wasn't solid. There was something there. Suddenly every trace of fatigue vanished. I worked faster. Stone after stone came loose. Dust filled the room. My hands ached. The winter light outside slowly faded. Then finally, the opening appeared. A dark cavity hidden behind the fireplace wall. For a moment, neither Shadow nor I moved. The secret had been hidden for years, maybe decades. Whatever waited inside had remained untouched all that time. I aimed the flashlight into the opening. The beam disappeared into darkness, then reflected off metal. A box. No, not a box. A container. Military green, steel, weatherproof. The sight stopped me cold. I knew exactly what it was. Military storage equipment. Kind used to protect sensitive materials in harsh environments. Nathan Briggs. It had to be Nathan. My heart began pounding. I reached inside. The container was heavier than expected. It took both hands to pull it free. Dust coated the surface, the paint had faded, but one detail remained visible, a small engraving, N.B. Nathan Briggs. I sat on the floor, staring at those initials. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Shadow moved closer. His shoulder touched mine. Neither of us looked away from the container. "What did you leave me, Commander?" The answer waited inside. The latches resisted at first. Years of dust and time had sealed them tight. Eventually they gave way. The lid opened slowly. A faint smell escaped. Paper, old paper. The scent of forgotten years. My breath caught. The container wasn't filled with valuables. No gold, no deeds, no cash. Nothing like that. Instead, it contained bundles of letters, dozens of them, carefully stacked, tied together with twine. Each envelope carried the same name, mine, Ethan Cole. My hands started shaking. I picked up the first bundle, then the second, then the third. There were so many, far more than a few casual notes. Someone had written these over years, maybe many years. Every envelope carried postage markings. Every envelope showed signs of travel, and every envelope carried the same red stamp.
Return to sender.
My stomach dropped. I grabbed another. Same stamp. Another, same result. Another, the same. Again. Dozens of returned letters, every single one addressed to me. Every single one never delivered, every single one sent back. I sat frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. For years I had believed something, a simple truth. At least I thought it was true. That after Caroline died, after my life collapsed, after I disappeared, nobody looked for me. Nobody cared enough to try. The evidence sitting in front of me shattered that belief. Someone had tried. Someone had tried over and over again. My eyes burned. I forced myself to stay focused. There were other items inside the container. Several leather-bound journals, maps, documents, folders. But my attention remained fixed on the letters. I counted them. 38. 38 attempts. 38 failures. 38 times someone had reached out and never reached me. Outside, snow drifted across the mountainside. The last sunlight vanished beyond the ridge. Darkness settled over the orchard. Yet inside the farmhouse, I felt as though the world had suddenly shifted beneath my feet. Because the loneliness I had carried for years, the certainty that I had been forgotten, no longer felt true. Shadow rested his head against my shoulder. The old dog remained silent, steady, present, the way he always was. I picked up the top envelope. Nathan's handwriting stared back at me. Even after all these years, I recognized it immediately. Strong, precise, unmistakable. A commander's handwriting, a mentor's handwriting, a friend's handwriting. My throat tightened. I wasn't ready, not yet. Reading the first letter felt like opening a door that couldn't be closed again. A door leading backward through years of grief, years of mistakes, years of loss. But eventually I would have to walk through it. Because whatever answer Nathan had left behind, it started here. With 38 letters, and one loyal dog who refused to stop digging until I found them. I looked down at Shadow. The old German shepherd lifted his eyes toward me. Patient, certain, almost satisfied, as if he'd completed a mission. Maybe he had. I reached over and scratched behind his ears. Good work, partner. His tail tapped softly against the floor. Outside, the dead orchard stood silent beneath the snow. Inside the farmhouse, surrounded by returned letters and forgotten memories, I realized something that sent a chill through me. Nathan Briggs hadn't hidden this container from the world. He had hidden it for me. And whatever waited inside those letters had the power to change everything. The snowstorm outside continued through the night. Wind rattled the farmhouse windows. The old walls groaned occasionally, as if the mountain itself were settling around us. But I barely noticed. The container sat open beside the fireplace. 38 returned letters rested in neat bundles across the floor. And for the first time in years, I was afraid of hope. Because hope had a way of reopening wounds. Hope asked questions. Questions like, what if someone had been trying to save me all along? I picked up the first envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. The postage stamp dated it nearly 9 years earlier. My hands trembled slightly. Shadow lay beside me, watching, waiting, the way he always did when something important was happening. I carefully opened the envelope. The inside was a single sheet of paper. Nathan's handwriting immediately brought back memories. Training grounds, briefing rooms, long nights overseas. The man had always written exactly the way he spoke. Direct, honest, no wasted words. Dear Ethan, I heard about Caroline's diagnosis today. I wish I had learned sooner. I don't know what to say that will make this easier. There probably aren't any words. But I want you to remember something. You are stronger than you think. And you don't have to carry this alone. Call me any hour, any day. No questions asked, Nathan. I lowered the letter. My chest tightened. Caroline had still been alive when Nathan wrote that. Still fighting. Still smiling even when the treatments exhausted her. I remembered sitting beside her hospital bed, promising things I couldn't control, promising she'd get better, promising we'd grow old together, promises that shattered anyway. I reached for the second letter, then the third. Hours passed. The fire crackled softly. Snow tapped against the windows, and Nathan's voice slowly returned to my life. One letter described fishing trips he wanted us to take. Another contained photographs of the mountains around Silver Ridge. Several included invitations, barbecues, veterans events, simple opportunities to reconnect. Everyone had been returned, unread, unanswered. The years unfolded in reverse, letter after letter, attempt after attempt. Then I found the first one, written after Caroline died. The date punched the breath from my lungs. I remembered that month. I remembered not answering calls, not opening mail, not speaking to anyone. I had simply disappeared. Nathan wrote, Ethan, I know grief can convince a man he's alone. Don't believe it. I buried friends. I buried family. I buried pieces of myself. And every time I thought isolation would protect me, it never did. It only made the pain heavier. Call me, even if all you can say is one word. Nathan. I stared at the page, the fire blurred, not because of smoke, because my eyes had filled with tears. I wiped them away quickly. Old habits. Seals weren't supposed to cry. At least that's what younger versions of ourselves like to pretend. Age teaches different lessons. Age teaches that grief doesn't care how tough you are. Shadow moved closer. His head settled across my boot. The simple gesture nearly broke me. Because he had been there too. He had watched Caroline fade. He had sat beside her hospital bed. He had waited by the front door for weeks afterward, as if he expected her to walk back inside. We both knew what loss looked like. I opened another letter, then another, then another. Each one revealed a man who had refused to give up on me. Nathan tracked my business collapse, my move from Denver, the foreclosure, the truck, the years of drifting. Somehow he kept finding addresses, kept trying, kept reaching, even when every attempt failed. One letter included a photograph. The image showed Nathan standing beside a peach orchard. Hundreds of trees stretched across a mountainside behind him. The same orchard surrounding me now. On the back he had written, "One day you'll understand why this place matters." I frowned. The note made no sense, at least not yet. I set the photograph aside, then reached for another letter. This one had been written only 3 years earlier, much more recent. The handwriting looked slightly weaker, not dramatically, but enough to notice. Age, or illness, or both. Ethan, I heard from an old friend that you're living out of your truck now. I wish I knew where. I wish I knew how to find you. Listen carefully. Nothing you've lost changes who you are. A bad season doesn't erase a good life. You taught younger men how to survive impossible situations. Now it's your turn to remember those lessons. Keep going, Nathan. I closed my eyes. A bad season doesn't erase a good life. The words landed harder than I expected, because for years I had defined myself by failure. The failed business, the lost house, the unpaid bills, the grief, the PTSD, the homelessness, the mistakes. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten everything that came before. Forgotten the husband I had been, the soldier, the mentor, the man Caroline loved, Nathan hadn't forgotten, not once. The realization hurt and healed at the same time. Outside, dawn slowly approached. The storm finally weakened. The mountain grew quiet. I looked down and realized only one envelope remained unopened. The final letter, the most recent. The last thing Nathan Briggs had ever written to me. My heart pounded. The paper felt heavier than the others. I carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was shakier now, not weak, just older. The first lines immediately told me what I already suspected. Ethan, the doctors tell me my time is getting short. I don't mind. Every man reaches the end eventually. What matters is whether he leaves something useful behind. I swallowed hard. Nathan knew. He knew he was dying. I continued reading. You probably don't know this, but I spent years looking for purpose after retirement. I thought purpose ended when the uniform came off. Turns out I was wrong. Purpose changes shape. That's all. The mountain taught me that. The orchard taught me that. Maybe someday it can teach you too. I paused. The fire crackled softly. Shadow lifted his head. The room felt impossibly still. Then I reached the final paragraph, the final message, the final gift. Trust Shadow. He'll find what I couldn't finish. Everything you need is here. Don't give up on the orchard. Don't give up on yourself. Nathan. I stared at the words again, then again. Trust Shadow. The phrase echoed through my mind. Nathan knew Shadow. Of course he did. The dog had served under his command. Nathan trusted him as much as I did, maybe more, which raised an obvious question. What exactly was Shadow trying to show me? The answer wasn't in the letters, at least not directly. I set them aside and examined the rest of the container. Leather journals, maps, engineering drawings, agricultural records, research notes. Hundreds of pages, years of work, years of effort, years of obsession. Nathan hadn't hidden a treasure. He had hidden a mission, and somehow Shadow had known exactly where to find it. The old German shepherd watched me from beside the hearth. His eyes reflected the firelight. Wise, patient. Certain, I reached over and scratched his neck. Looks like we're not done yet. His tail tapped softly against the floor. The same way it always had before a new assignment, before a new search, before a new objective. Outside, dawn finally touched the mountains. The first sunlight painted the snow-covered orchard in gold. The dead trees stood silent against the ridge, waiting, just as they had waited for years. For Nathan, for answers, for someone willing to listen. And somewhere inside the stack of journals beside me, the real mystery was about to begin. Because Nathan Briggs hadn't spent 25 years studying a dead orchard, and men like Nathan Briggs never devoted their lives to things that didn't matter. For the next 3 days, I barely left the farmhouse. The mountain disappeared beneath another storm. Snow buried the road. Wind rattled the windows. The outside world faded away. And I sat beside the fireplace, surrounded by Nathan's journals. The leather covers were worn. The pages carried decades of notes, observations, measurements, maps, sketches, calculations. The deeper I read, the stranger the story became. At first, the journals seemed ordinary. Agricultural records, tree health reports, weather observations, soil samples, the kind of notes any dedicated farmer might keep. But Nathan Briggs wasn't a farmer. Not really. He was a Navy SEAL, which meant he approached problems differently. Methodically, obsessively, patiently. The journals reflected that mindset. Every detail was documented, every theory tested, every observation verified. The orchard wasn't a hobby. It was a mission. And Nathan had spent 25 years trying to solve it. I flipped through another notebook. One page stopped me cold. A hand-drawn cross-section of the mountain, layers of soil, rock formations, underground channels, water pathways. Dozens of handwritten notes filled the margins. A sentence had been underlined 3 times. The orchard is not dying. It is building. I stared at the words. Building? The trees looked dead. The county considered them dead. Victor Hale considered them dead. The entire town believed they were dead. Yet Nathan had written those words with complete certainty. I turned the page. Then another. Then another. Slowly the pieces began fitting together. The orchard had stopped producing peaches nearly 15 years earlier. That much was true. Harvest records confirmed it. Local newspaper clippings confirmed it. Tax documents confirmed it. Year after year, production declined, then eventually stopped. Most people assumed the trees were finished. Nathan disagreed. His journals revealed why. Beneath the mountain existed a layer of volcanic soil unlike anything found elsewhere in the region. Rich, dark, loaded with nutrients. The kind of soil agricultural experts dreamed about. The problem was depth. The layer sat far below the surface, far beneath the reach of most plant roots. According to Nathan's research, something extraordinary had happened. The orchard's root systems kept growing. Deeper, far deeper than anyone expected. He had spent years mapping them, tracking them, studying them. The deeper the roots traveled, the more resources they discovered. And eventually, the trees stopped producing fruit. Not because they were dying, because they were investing everything underground. The theory sounded impossible, ridiculous, almost insane, until I saw the evidence. Photographs, root measurements, excavation records, university soil reports, scientific analyses. Nathan had documented everything. One notebook contained correspondence with agricultural researchers. Most dismissed him. A few showed interest. None fully understood what he had discovered. Nathan never stopped. The journals became increasingly detailed, increasingly focused, increasingly certain. Then I found the maps, large hand-drawn maps. The same maps Victor Hale apparently wanted very badly. I spread them across the dining table. Shadow watched from nearby. The maps showed something far more complicated than an orchard. They revealed a network, underground water channels, natural springs, ancient runoff paths created over centuries. The entire mountainside functioned like a giant reservoir. Nathan had traced every major pathway, every underground water source, every drainage route. The hidden system stretched beneath the orchard like veins beneath skin. I leaned back in my chair. The implications hit slowly. Then all at once, water. Victor wasn't interested in peaches. He was interested in water. Mountain water. Reliable water. Water that could become incredibly valuable, especially in Colorado, especially during drought years. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the orchard stretched across the snowy slope, silent, motionless, waiting. Maybe Nathan had been right. Maybe nobody understood what stood out there. Not even me. A low sound pulled my attention away. Shadow had crossed the room. The old German shepherd stood near the front door, watching, alert. I followed his gaze. Headlights. A vehicle climbing the mountain road. Not Victor. Different truck. Older, slower. The vehicle stopped near the farmhouse. A woman stepped out. Mid-60s. Heavy winter coat. Gray hair beneath a knit hat. She carried a cardboard box. I opened the door. The cold hit immediately. She smiled. "You must be Ethan." I nodded. "And your Grace." The smile widened slightly. "Figured that out, did you? I've been getting your deliveries." She held up the box. "Then here's another." I took it. The box felt heavier than usual. Food, coffee, fresh bread. A few homemade preserves. The kindness embarrassed me slightly. Grace seemed to notice. "Nathan helped people." She shrugged. "Some of us still remember." I looked toward the orchard. "So you knew him?" The woman followed my gaze. A sadness entered her eyes. "Most of my life," she paused. "He talked about you. That caught me off guard. Me? Often." The answer landed harder than expected. Because Nathan's letters had already revealed part of that truth. Hearing it from someone else made it real. Grace smiled softly. "He worried about you." The words lingered. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Wind swept across the orchard. Snow drifted between the trees. Then Grace glanced past me into the farmhouse. Her eyes landed on the journals, the maps, the research papers. Her expression changed immediately. "You found them." Not a question, a statement. I nodded. Grace slowly stepped onto the porch. "The journals." Again, not a question. "Yes." She stared toward the orchard. A long silence followed. Then she sighed. People laughed at him. "Nathan never mentioned that. At least not directly," Grace continued. For years, her eyes remained fixed on the mountain. He kept saying the orchard wasn't dead. A faint smile touched her face. Nobody believed him. I thought about the courtroom, the laughter, Victor Hale, the entire town. Some things never changed. What did you believe? I asked. Grace smiled. I believed Nathan believed it. That answer felt honest. Maybe more honest than certainty. She adjusted her coat, then pointed toward the orchard. Every spring he'd walk out there before sunrise. Why? He said he was listening. I frowned. Listens for what? Grace laughed softly. The roots. The answer sounded absurd, yet somehow not completely absurd. Not anymore. She started walking back toward her truck, then stopped. One final thing. I waited. Her gaze shifted toward the road below, toward town, toward Victor Hale. If Victor starts visiting more often, her voice hardened. Be careful. The warning surprised me. Why? Grace hesitated, as though weighing her words. Finally, she answered. Because Victor Hale spent 20 years trying to buy this property. My stomach tightened. 20 years. Exactly like Nathan's journals suggested. Exactly like my instincts suspected. Grace opened her truck door. People don't chase worthless land for 20 years. Then she drove away, leaving me standing alone in the snow. The mountain seemed quieter afterward, heavier. As darkness settled over the orchard that evening, I returned to the journals. One final notebook remained unread, the newest. The last one Nathan ever completed. I opened it carefully. The final pages contained recent observations, recent measurements, recent predictions. Then I reached the last entry. The final words Nathan Briggs ever wrote. March 14. If calculations remain accurate, awakening should occur soon. The route network is complete. The spring system remains active. The mountain is ready. All signs suggest activation is approaching. If I do not live to see it, Ethan will. Trust Shadow. He knows where to look. I stared at the page. Awakening. The mountain is ready. The words sounded less like agriculture, more like prophecy. Then I noticed something tucked inside the back cover. A folded document, different from the others. Official. Stamped. Recent. I unfolded it. My pulse immediately accelerated. The document contained property boundary surveys, and highlighted across several sections in red ink were notes. Unauthorized access attempts. Trespassing activity observed. Unknown survey crews operating without permission. Repeated sightings near eastern spring channels. The dates stretched back years. Long before Nathan died. Long before I arrived. Long before the inheritance. Someone had been investigating the property in secret. Someone searching for something. Someone desperate enough to keep coming back. Victor Hale. The realization settled heavily over me. This wasn't about peaches. Not anymore. Maybe it never had been. And somewhere beneath the snow-covered mountain, beneath the orchard, beneath the roots, a secret valuable enough to drive a man for 20 years was still waiting to be uncovered. And the more I learned about Nathan Briggs' orchard, the less I believed in coincidence. The snow finally began retreating in March. Not all at once. A few patches disappeared from sunny slopes. Then the creek below the ridge started moving again. The long white blanket covering the orchard slowly broke apart. Dark earth emerged. Dead leaves appeared. The mountain seemed to stretch awake after months of sleep. For the first time since arriving, I could walk the property without sinking knee-deep into snow. Shadow loved it. The old German shepherd moved through the orchard with renewed energy. His injured joints seemed to forget their age whenever we crossed those rows of trees. Every morning we walked together. Every morning he stopped at the same areas Nathan's maps marked as important. And every morning I found myself paying closer attention. Nathan's journals had become my daily routine. Coffee, firewood, maps, research, repeat. The orchard no longer looked dead to me. It looked unfinished, like a puzzle, waiting for its final piece. Unfortunately, someone else seemed determined to stop me from finding it. The first sign appeared 3 days after the last snowstorm. I woke before sunrise. Something felt wrong. Years of military service create instincts that never fully disappear. The feeling wasn't fear, it was awareness, a subtle sense that something had changed. Shadow sensed it too. The dog was already standing near the front door, completely still, listening. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The mountains sat beneath pale blue morning light. Everything looked normal. Until I reached the equipment shed. The padlock hung broken. I froze. The door stood slightly open. Wind moved it back and forth. Creak, creak, creak. Shadow immediately moved ahead of me. Alert, focused, his ears forward, his body tense. The interior looked disturbed, tools scattered, shelves emptied, drawers pulled open. Nothing valuable had been stolen. At least not anything obvious. Instead, someone had searched. That realization bothered me more than theft would have. They weren't looking for equipment. They were looking for information. Maps, documents, research, anything connected to Nathan's work. I checked the farmhouse. Nothing missing. The journals remained hidden. The letters remained untouched. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by anger. Someone had been inside my property. Someone had crossed a line, and I knew exactly who wanted access badly enough to try. Victor Hale. The next surprise arrived 2 days later. A county truck rolled up the driveway, then another. 3 men stepped out carrying clipboards, official jackets, official badges, official expressions. I met them on the porch. The oldest introduced himself. County Property Compliance Division. That sounded unpleasant already. We've received reports. Of course they had. Reports, complaints, concerns. People always hid behind those words. What kind of reports? The man glanced at his paperwork. Unsafe structures. He looked toward the barn. Potential code violations. Then the farmhouse. Questions regarding occupancy. I almost laughed, almost. Instead, I invited them inside. They inspected everything. The house, the barn, the property. For nearly 3 hours. By the time they left, I understood exactly what was happening. Victor couldn't buy me out, so he was trying to pressure me out. The same tactic. Different battlefield. I stood on the porch watching the county vehicles disappear. Shadow sat beside me. Neither of us looked surprised. 3 days later, things escalated. The weather had warmed enough for me to begin examining sections of Nathan's irrigation maps. According to his notes, several underground spring channels crossed the eastern edge of the orchard. If Nathan was correct, those channels might explain everything. The water, the root system, Victor's obsession. That afternoon, Shadow suddenly froze. We had been walking near the eastern boundary. The dog stopped so abruptly that I nearly walked into him. His ears lifted. A low growl emerged. I followed his gaze. Movement, trees. Someone was there. The figure vanished immediately. Fast. Too fast for an accidental visitor. My pulse accelerated. Shadow. The command barely left my mouth. The German shepherd exploded forward. Years vanished from him. The old dog transformed into the working canine I remembered. Focused, fast, fearless. He disappeared between the trees. Branches snapped. Leaves rustled. Then shouting, human shouting, I ran. The terrain was uneven. Roots crossed the ground. Loose rocks shifted beneath my boots ahead. Shadow barked furiously. The sound echoed through the orchard. I rounded a row of trees and finally saw them. A man dressed in dark clothing sprinted toward the tree line. Shadow pursued only a few yards behind. The stranger carried something. A tube, maps, papers, I couldn't tell. Then disaster struck. The man vaulted a fence. Shadow followed. A sharp yelp split the air. My heart dropped. The dog stumbled. The stranger vanished into the forest. Gone, Shadow remained behind. I reached him cents later. The sight made my stomach twist. Barbed wire, hidden among brush. The old dog had caught his shoulder crossing the fence. Blood stained his fur. Not life-threatening, but painful. Very painful. Easy, buddy. I knelt beside him. My hand shook slightly. Not from fear, from anger. The same anger that used to arrive during combat. Cold, focused, dangerous. Because this wasn't an accident. The wire had been positioned deliberately, and whoever fled had been carrying property maps. I knew it. The evidence sat right in front of me. Someone had been surveying the orchard. Again. exactly like Nathan's final notebook described. Back at the farmhouse, I cleaned the wound. Shadow endured it without complaint. Typical. The dog had always been tougher than most people. Once the bandage was secure, he settled beside the fireplace, exhausted but alert, watching me, watching the room, watching the mountain. Sat at the dining table. Nathan's maps spread across the surface, the pieces finally aligned. The hidden survey crews, the trespassing, the county complaints, the broken lock, the stranger, the barbed wire. This wasn't random. It was coordinated. Victor Hale wanted something important enough to spend years chasing, something valuable enough to risk criminal trespassing, something hidden somewhere on this property. My eyes drifted across Nathan's maps, then stopped. One section looked different, highlighted, annotated repeatedly. The Eastern Spring channels. Nathan had circled them dozens of times. More notes crowded the margins, additional measurements, extra calculations. The area clearly mattered, a lot. I leaned closer, then noticed something I had overlooked before. Tiny coordinates, precise locations, recent additions. Nathan's final entries, the last places he investigated before his death, the exact same area where the intruder had been spotted. My pulse quickened. Not coincidence. Never coincidence. The answer sat somewhere out there, hidden beneath the orchard, hidden beneath the mountain, and Victor Hale knew it. Outside, evening settled across Silver Ridge. Long shadows stretched between rows of dead trees. Wind whispered through bare branches. The orchard looked silent, but it wasn't. A war had begun. Not the kind fought with rifles, not the kind fought on foreign soil. This war revolved around patience, secrets, land, and truth. Victor Hale had made his move. Now I understood the stakes. The problem for Victor was simple. He wasn't the only one who knew how to fight for something valuable. And he had made one critical mistake. He underestimated the dog. Because while Victor spent 20 years chasing Nathan's secrets, Shadow had already found the first one. And somehow, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to find another. The problem was that spring had arrived, and nothing happened. Not one blossom, not one leaf, not one sign that Nathan Briggs had been right. March faded into April. The snow vanished from most of the mountain. Creeks flowed again. Birds returned. Wildflowers pushed through the thawing earth. The entire San Juan Range seemed to wake from its winter sleep. Everything except the orchard. Every morning I walked the rows. Every morning I carried Nathan's journals. Every morning I checked the trees. And every morning I found most thing. Gray bark, bare branches, silence. The optimism that had carried me through winter began slipping away. Not all at once, a little at a time. Like water draining from a cracked bucket. The mountain remained beautiful. But beauty and certainty are not the same thing. Nathan's research still fascinated me. The maps still made sense. The spring system was real. The root network was real. The soil samples were real. But the orchard itself? The orchard refused to cooperate. One afternoon I stood beside the oldest tree on the property. According to Nathan's notes, it was nearly 70 years old. Its twisted branches stretched across the sky like skeletal fingers. I ran a hand across the bark. Cold, dry. Motionless, no buds, no swelling, nothing. Shadow stood nearby, watching me, watching the tree, watching everything. I sighed. What if we're wrong? The dog tilted his head. The question wasn't really for him. It was for me, because doubt had finally arrived. And once doubt arrives, it never travels alone. It brings fear, frustration, exhaustion. I returned to the farmhouse. The journals waited on the table. Nathan's final prediction stared back at me. Awakening should occur soon. The mountain is ready. The certainty in his handwriting almost felt unfair now, because Nathan wasn't here to explain. Nathan wasn't here to answer questions. Nathan wasn't here to see the orchard remain stubbornly dead. The knock on the door startled me. Grace Whitaker stood on the porch, a pie balanced carefully in her hands. I opened the door. She smiled. "You look tired," I laughed. "That obvious?" A blind man could see it. The answer made me smile despite myself. Grace stepped inside. Her eyes drifted toward the journals, then toward the window overlooking the orchard. Still nothing? I shook my head. The smile faded from her face. She understood immediately. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. Nathan had doubts too. I looked up. What? She nodded. Near the end. The words caught my attention immediately. Grace sat at the kitchen table. The town remembers the confident version of Nathan. She glanced toward the mountain. I remember the worried version. I waited. There were days he thought he'd wasted years. The statement hit harder than expected. Because Nathan's journals contained almost no uncertainty. Only determination. Only belief. Grace seemed to read my thoughts. He didn't write the doubt down. A sad smile crossed her face. But he felt it. I looked at the orchard. The dead trees. The silent mountain. The endless waiting. Maybe that knowledge should have comforted me. Instead, it made me miss him. Because suddenly Nathan felt human again. Not a legend. Not a mentor. Not a mystery. Just a man who hoped he was right. The same way I hoped he was right now. After Grace left, I spent the evening walking the orchard. The sun dipped low behind the mountains. Orange light spilled across the hillside. Long shadows stretched between the trees. The entire landscape looked beautiful and hopeless. A dangerous combination. Near dusk, I spotted a truck parked beside the road below. Victor Hale again. He didn't approach the farmhouse, didn't leave the vehicle. He simply sat there, watching. The sight irritated me, then unsettled me, then confused me, because Victor didn't look confident anymore. He looked impatient, as if time mattered, as if he needed something to happen. Soon, the following morning, his answer arrived. The black SUV climbed the mountain road shortly after sunrise. I already knew why he was there. Victor stepped out holding a folder. The smile he wore looked practiced. Polite, professional, false. I've got a new offer. Of course he did. I didn't invite him inside. We stood on the porch. The orchard spread behind us. Victor opened the folder. The number nearly made me blink. $125,000. Cash. My chest tightened. Not because I wanted the money. Because I needed it. The farmhouse still needed repairs. Medical bills still existed. Savings didn't exist. And PTSD wasn't exactly a profitable career path. Victor watched my reaction carefully. He knew. The man was smart enough to recognize weakness when he saw it. You've done your due diligence. His voice remained calm. You've looked into Nathan's theories. No response. You've seen the orchard. Still nothing. Victor glanced toward the rows of dead trees. The results speak for themselves. For the first time since arriving, I couldn't immediately argue, because the orchard still looked exactly as it had the day I inherited it. Dead. Victor sensed hesitation. His confidence grew. You don't owe Nathan anything. The words landed like a slap. Immediately. Violently, I felt anger rise. Nathan had spent years trying to help me. Years. The man wasn't family, wasn't obligated, yet he never stopped reaching. I looked directly at Victor. Leave. His smile faded. The polite version disappeared. The real Victor emerged. Cold, impatient, calculating. You'll regret it. The words carried more weight than before. Not a threat, a promise. Then he turned and walked away. The SUV disappeared down the mountain road. Silence returned, but not peace. That night I couldn't sleep. The house creaked in the darkness. The wind moved through the orchard. My thoughts refused to slow. What if Victor was right? The question poisoned everything. What if Nathan's theory failed? What if the orchard truly was dead? What if I was clinging to a ghost because I needed purpose? The thoughts followed me through the night, then through the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the week, I did something I hadn't done since arriving. I packed a bag, not completely, not enough to leave, just enough to see what it felt like. The truck sat ready, the road sat open. The money waited if I wanted it. The temptation frightened me, because it felt reasonable, and reasonable decisions often look like surrender when viewed later. Late one morning, I sat on the porch staring at the orchard. Shadow lay nearby. The old dog had recovered well from his injury. The bandage was gone. The scar remained, a reminder. the same as mine. The mountain stood silent beneath a bright blue sky. Then I noticed something. Shadow wasn't beside the porch anymore. I stood, looked around. Nothing. The dog had vanished. That wasn't normal. Shadow wandered. Shadow explored. But he never disappeared. Not without checking back. Not without letting me know. Minutes passed, then more. No sign of him. I grabbed my jacket. An uneasy feeling settled into my stomach. The same feeling I had experienced before missions went wrong. The same feeling that told you something important was happening. I crossed the orchard, called his name. No response. The rows stretched endlessly ahead. Gray trees, dark earth, spring sunlight, no dog. The farther I walked, the stronger the feeling became. Shadow wasn't lost. He wanted me to follow. The realization arrived suddenly, the same way it had before, the same instinct, the same certainty. The dog was leading somewhere, toward something, toward an answer. My pace quickened. The orchard seemed unusually quiet. No wind, no birds, only silence. Then finally I saw him, far ahead, near the center of the orchard. Shadow sat perfectly still beneath one of the oldest trees on the property, waiting, watching. And for the first time in weeks, hope returned. Because the old dog wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the tree. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The mountain seemed to hold its breath. Sunlight filtered through the bare branches overhead. A gentle spring breeze moved across the hillside. The orchard remained silent. Yet something felt different. Shadow sat perfectly still beneath the tree. Not excited, not barking, not digging, simply watching, waiting. The same patience Nathan Briggs had written about so many times. I approached slowly. The old German shepherd never took his eyes off the branch above him. My heart began beating faster. Not because I saw anything, because I suddenly believed there might be something to see. I stepped closer, then closer. The rough bark filled my vision. Twisted limbs stretched overhead. Dead wood, gray wood, silent wood. At least that's what I expected. Then I saw it, a tiny speck of color. So small I almost missed it. I blinked, looked again. The spot remained, a tiny pink bud no larger than the tip of my finger, growing directly from a branch that had appeared dead for years. I froze. The world disappeared. The mountain disappeared. The wind disappeared. Everything narrowed to that single blossom. The first sign of life. The first proof. The first answer. My hand trembled as I reached toward it. Careful, gentle, almost afraid it would vanish. The tiny bud felt real beneath my fingertips. Firm, alive, impossible. A laugh escaped me. Then another. Then suddenly I found myself crying. Not dramatic tears, not loud sobs, just quiet tears running down my face. Because for months I had been carrying doubt. For years I had been carrying grief. And somehow that tiny blossom cracked both burdens open at the same time. Nathan had been right. The orchard wasn't dead. Shadow rose slowly. His tail moved once, then twice, almost as if he already knew. Maybe he did. I crouched beside him, wrapped one arm around his neck. The old dog leaned into me. Together we stared at the blossom. The first miracle, the first victory, the first promise. By evening I found 3 more buds. The next morning I found 12. 2 days later I stopped counting, because suddenly they were everywhere. Tiny green shoots, swollen branches, pale hints of pink emerging across the orchard. Life spread through the trees like fire moving through dry grass. Fast, relentless, beautiful. The transformation accelerated every day. Word spread quickly. Silver Ridge wasn't a large town. News traveled faster than snowmelt. The old orchard on Nathan Briggs Mountain was waking up. Most people didn't believe it, at first. Then drivers started stopping along the road, then hikers, then ranchers, then farmers. Everyone wanted to see for themselves. By the second week of April, the impossible became undeniable. The mountainside exploded into color. Pink, white, gold. Thousands upon thousands of blossoms opened simultaneously. The entire orchard transformed into a sea of flowers. The sight stole your breath, even from miles away. The blooming trees stretched across the mountain like a living cloud. Photographs couldn't capture it. Words couldn't explain it. You had to stand there, had to see it, had to smell it. The fragrance drifted through the valley for miles. Sweet, fresh, alive. Bees arrived by the thousands. The constant hum filled the orchard from dawn until sunset. Nature itself seemed drawn toward whatever Nathan had spent decades building. I walked through the rows every morning, touching blossoms, studying branches, listening to the sound of life returning. And every time I looked down, Shadow walked beside me. His scarred shoulder had healed. His pace remained steady. His eyes remained watchful. The old warrior looked strangely proud, as if this victory belonged to him too. Maybe it did. 3 days later, the first reporters arrived. A local newspaper from Durango, then another from Grand Junction. Soon, television crews followed. Agricultural specialists, university researchers, soil scientists, botanists. Everyone wanted answers. Most left with more questions. One researcher spent 6 hours examining root samples. When he finished, he looked stunned. "This shouldn't exist," I smiled. Nathan would have enjoyed hearing that. Another expert studied the underground spring maps. Her reaction was similar. "This is extraordinary." The phrase repeated itself all week. Extraordinary, impossible, remarkable. Nathan Briggs spent 25 years being called foolish. Now the experts were struggling to explain why he had been right. One afternoon, a convoy of university vehicles climbed the mountain. Researchers spread across the property, collecting samples, measuring water flow, testing soil composition. Shadow followed them closely. The dog clearly distrusted strangers touching his orchard. I couldn't blame him. Late that evening, one of the lead scientists approached me. Her face carried the expression of someone trying to process a discovery. "Mr. Cole," I looked up. She held several reports. Her hands actually shook. We ran the numbers 3 times. My stomach tightened. "What numbers?" "The soil composition." She stared toward the orchard. "The nutrient density is unlike anything we've documented in this region." I thought about Nathan's journals, his decades of notes, his years of being ignored. The scientist continued. "The volcanic layer beneath the mountain created ideal conditions." She paused. "But that's not the remarkable part." "What is?" She looked directly at me. "The root network." Even now the words made her sound amazed. "The trees are connected." Nathan had known. Of course he had. The scientist shook her head slowly. "The scale is incredible." I glanced toward the orchard. Thousands of blossoms moved gently in the afternoon breeze. A living system, a living community, a living secret hidden beneath everyone's feet, exactly as Nathan described. The story reached Denver by the end of the month. Then Colorado Springs. Then National Agricultural Publications. The orchard became famous almost overnight. People traveled hours to see it, to photograph it, to walk among the blossoms. And through it all, I noticed one person was missing. Victor Hale. For nearly 3 weeks he disappeared. No visits, no offers, no threats. Nothing. The silence worried me, because men like Victor rarely quit. They simply changed tactics. The answer arrived on a windy afternoon in early May. I found tire tracks near the eastern boundary. Fresh tracks, deep tracks, not from visitors, not from tourists. The location mattered. The same section Nathan highlighted repeatedly. The same area where the trespasser had appeared. The same area connected to the underground spring system. Shadow discovered them before I did. The dog stopped suddenly, growled softly, then followed the tracks into the trees. My pulse quickened. The blossoms danced overhead. Beautiful, peaceful, deceptive. Because beneath that beauty, the conflict hadn't ended. It had only changed. Nathan's theory had been proven. The orchard had awakened. The mountain had revealed part of its secret. And somewhere out there, Victor Hale was watching everything unfold. Waiting, planning, preparing. Because the blooming orchard had just become far more valuable than anyone imagined. And men driven by greed rarely walk away when the prize finally appears. Summer arrived early that year. Too early. By June, the mountains around Silver Ridge looked different. Not dead, not yet, but tired. The green valleys began fading to dull shades of brown. Creeks that normally ran cold and strong through midsummer slowed to a trickle. Dust lingered in the air, grass crackled beneath boots. Old ranchers sitting outside the diner in town started saying the same thing. "We're in trouble." By July, nobody was laughing. The drought had settled across southwestern Colorado like a curse. Day after day, the sun burned overhead. Clouds appeared rarely. Rain became a memory. Fields suffered first, then gardens, then orchards. The reports spread quickly. Apple farms losing crops. Peach groves dropping fruit before ripening. Hay production collapsing. Cattle ranchers hauling water from miles away. The entire region seemed to be drying out, and somehow, Stone Ridge Orchard remained green. The difference became impossible to ignore. I walked the rows every morning. The leaves stayed healthy, the branches remained strong. Tiny peaches continued growing. The underground spring system Nathan had mapped was doing exactly what he predicted. The mountain was feeding itself. Deep beneath the surface, hidden water continued flowing through channels nobody else knew existed. The roots found it. The orchard survived, while everything around it struggled. University researchers returned twice that month. The second visit lasted nearly a week. They installed monitoring equipment, collected more soil samples, studied water flow rates. Every conclusion sounded increasingly unbelievable. Nathan Briggs had discovered one of the most resilient agricultural systems in the state, perhaps in the country. The old Navy SEAL everyone dismissed had been decades ahead of his time. I wished he could have seen it. One evening, as the sun settled behind the mountains, I stood beneath the first tree that bloomed. Shadow rested nearby. The orchard glowed gold beneath the fading light. Thousands of peaches hung from the branches, still growing, still ripening, still alive. A truck climbed the mountain road. I knew the vehicle immediately, Victor Hale. The man stepped out slowly. For once, he didn't look confident. He looked exhausted. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the strain in his face. The drought was hurting him, hurting everyone. But I doubted that was why he came. Victor walked toward the orchard. His eyes moved from tree to tree, studying, calculating, hungering. Finally, he stopped. 20 years. I said nothing. Victor laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because reality had become difficult to accept. 20 years I chased this property. His gaze remained fixed on the orchard. I thought Nathan was hiding water. That got my attention, Victor noticed. Turns out I was right. The admission hung in the air. At least he was honest now. More honest than before. What exactly did you want? Victor smiled sadly. The same thing every developer wants. His eyes moved toward the valley. Control. The answer felt disturbingly truthful. Control of water. Control of land. Control of growth. Control of money. Control of the future. The drought had revealed exactly how valuable those things were. Victor reached into his pocket, pulled out another offer. I never looked at the number. He never bothered reading it. We both knew the answer. No. The single word ended the conversation. Victor nodded slowly, almost respectfully. Then something changed behind his eyes. Something cold. Something desperate. The look vanished quickly. But not before I saw it. Shadow saw it too. The German Shepherd stood immediately, watching Victor, every muscle tense. The old dog's instincts had never failed me before. They weren't failing now. Victor returned to his vehicle, without another word, without another offer, without another smile, and somehow that worried me more than all the previous visits combined, because desperate people are dangerous, and Victor Hale had just run out of options. The following week became the hottest of the summer. Temperatures shattered local records. The drought worsened. News crews arrived almost daily. Everyone wanted to understand why one orchard remained healthy while everything else suffered. I spent most interviews talking about Nathan, his research, his patience, his vision. The attention never felt like mine. It belonged to him and to Shadow. Without the dog, none of this would have happened. Without Shadow, the letters stayed hidden. The journals stayed buried. The truth stayed lost. One afternoon, I noticed something unusual. Smoke, far away at first. A thin gray line against the horizon. Wildfires weren't uncommon during drought years, but this one felt different. Closer. The smell lingered in the air. The mountain seemed uneasy. Even the wildlife noticed. Birds moved strangely. Deer traveled lower than usual. Shadow remained unusually alert, watching, listening, waiting. Then came the wind. A powerful storm system moved through the mountains, not bringing rain, only wind, strong enough to bend trees, strong enough to carry sparks for miles. The danger increased immediately. Every rancher in the county knew it. Every firefighter knew it. Every resident watched the horizon nervously. That evening the orchard seemed restless. Leaves rustled continuously. Branches swayed. Dust moved across the road. I sat on the farmhouse porch with Shadow beside me, watching the sunset, trying to ignore the unease building inside me. Then darkness arrived, and with it, the smell. Smoke, fresh smoke, close, very close. Shadow reacted first. The old dog sprang to his feet. A deep bark shattered the evening silence. Then another, then another. My pulse accelerated instantly. I stood, turned, and saw it, fire. Bright orange flames rising behind the barn. For one terrible second, my mind refused to process what I was seeing. Then training took over. Movement, action, response. I ran. Shadow ran beside me. The wind fed the flames aggressively. Dry conditions made everything worse. The fire spread frighteningly fast. Heat rolled across the orchard. Smoke filled the air. The barn roof had already ignited. Burning embers lifted into the night sky. The sight turned my blood cold, because dozens of workers had been on the property earlier that day. Researchers, seasonal helpers, visitors. Some vehicles still sat nearby, which meant someone could still be inside. Help! The scream cut through the chaos, a human voice. Somewhere behind the smoke, my heart dropped. The wind swallowed the sound immediately. Then came another shout. Closer this time, panicked. Trapped, I started toward the fire. Shadow exploded past me, straight into the smoke. Shadow! The command vanished into the wind. The dog never slowed. Through the swirling darkness, I caught brief glimpses of him. A shadow moving through smoke, disappearing, reappearing, searching, then gone again. Seconds felt like hours. The flames climbed higher. The heat intensified. Every instinct screamed that the situation was becoming critical. Then I saw him. Shadow emerged from the smoke, running hard. Not toward safety. Toward me. Then he turned sharply, looked back, barked, looked back again. The signal was unmistakable. Follow me. I didn't hesitate. Together we charged into the smoke. And somewhere beyond the flames, lives were waiting to be saved. The smoke was so thick I could barely see. Every breath tasted like ash. The wind howled through the orchard, carrying sparks across the mountainside. Somewhere ahead, voices shouted for help. Then Shadow appeared again. A dark shape moving through orange light and black smoke. The old German shepherd barked once. Sharp, urgent, then turned and disappeared deeper into the fire. I followed. Years of training took over. Fear became focus. Panic became movement. The same instincts that once carried me through combat zones now carried me through burning darkness. A collapsed equipment trailer emerged from the smoke. One side had fallen against a ditch. 2 researchers were trapped behind it. I recognized them immediately. Both had been studying Nathan's spring system that afternoon. One woman coughed violently. The other man was trying unsuccessfully to move debris blocking their escape. The flames were closing in. Fast. Move back, I shouted. The wind nearly swallowed my voice. Shadow reached them first. The dog barked continuously, keeping them focused, keeping them moving. The same way military dogs sometimes guide injured soldiers towards safety. I grabbed part of the twisted trailer frame. Pulled. Nothing. The metal refused to move. Again. Still nothing. Then adrenaline found another gear. The frame shifted. Just enough. The opening widened. The trapped researchers squeezed through. One stumbled. The woman nearly collapsed. Shadow immediately moved beside her, guiding, protecting, leading. The old dog never stopped working. Not even now. Not even at his age. We pushed through the smoke together, toward open ground, toward safety, toward the orchard. Then everything changed. A loud cracking sound exploded behind us. I turned instinctively. Part of the burning barn roof collapsed. A shower of sparks erupted into the air. The wind grabbed them immediately. Thousands of glowing embers scattered across the property. The orchard, the dry grass, the surrounding hillsides, everywhere. My heart sank. If the fire reached the trees, months of growth could vanish overnight. Years of Nathan's work, gone. The mountain suddenly became a battlefield. Fire crews arrived minutes later, then more and more. Red lights flashed across the darkness. Sirens echoed through the valley. Volunteers arrived from town. Farmers, neighbors, people who months earlier barely knew my name. Now they formed bucket lines, moved equipment, protected trees, fought for the orchard. The same orchard they once laughed about. The irony wasn't lost on me. Neither was the gratitude. Near midnight, the fire was finally contained, not extinguished. Contained, the barn was gone. Nothing remained except blackened beams and smoking debris. But the farmhouse survived, the orchard survived, and the trapped researchers survived. Thanks largely to one aging German shepherd, I finally found Shadow near dawn. The old dog lay beside the edge of the orchard, exhausted, breathing heavily. At first I thought he was sleeping. Then I saw the burns. My stomach dropped. The fur along one side of his body had been singed. Several areas looked raw, painful, far more serious than I wanted to admit. Shadow. The dog lifted his head slightly. His tail moved once. Just once. Enough to tell me he recognized my voice. Then it stopped. I dropped beside him. For a terrifying moment, the world narrowed to that single instant. Not the orchard, not the fire, not Victor Hale, not the investigation, only Shadow, the partner who had carried me through war, through grief, through homelessness, through every nightmare. The thought of losing him felt unbearable. A veterinarian from town arrived within an hour. She examined him carefully. Her expression remained serious, but hopeful. "He's tough," I laughed weakly. "That's an understatement." The veterinarian smiled. "He's going to hurt for a while." My chest tightened. "But I think he'll recover." The relief nearly knocked me over. I sat beside him most of that day. The old dog slept, occasionally opening one eye to make sure I was still nearby. The same thing he'd done after surgeries years ago. The same thing he'd done after missions. The same thing he'd always done. Because that's what partners do. 3 days later, investigators arrived. Not local investigators. State investigators. The scale of the fire had attracted attention, especially after rumors spread about sabotage, especially after reports surfaced about Victor Hale. The questions began immediately. Witnesses, statements, timelines, property disputes, financial records, everything. The process moved faster than anyone expected. Apparently, Victor Hale had created enemies, lots of them. The drought had already damaged his business empire. The fire investigation opened doors people had wanted opened for years. One discovery led to another, then another, then another. Soon the entire picture emerged. Victor had spent decades trying to acquire Nathan's land, not because of peaches, not because of development, because of water. Nathan's maps had identified underground reserves capable of supporting enormous agricultural expansion. Water rights connected to those reserves could eventually become worth millions. Victor knew it, or suspected it, close enough. For 20 years he tried buying the property. When Nathan refused, Victor waited. When Nathan died, Victor expected an easy purchase. Instead, he inherited a problem. Me. The evidence continued piling up. Unauthorized survey operations, private investigators, trespassing complaints, hidden financial transactions. Witness testimony. The fire became the final thread that unraveled everything. One former employee eventually came forward, then another, then another. The story spread through Silver Ridge faster than any wildfire. Victor Hale's reputation collapsed. The same people who once laughed at me now stopped me in town. Not out of pity, out of respect. The change felt strange. One afternoon, I walked into the diner. Conversation stopped briefly. Months earlier, that would have bothered me. Now something different happened. A rancher stood. Then another, then several more. Nobody made speeches. Nobody created a scene. They simply nodded. The gesture meant more than words. Grace sat near the window. Smiling, she understood. Nathan would have understood too. Outside, summer continued. The orchard thrived. The peaches grew larger every week. Researchers published preliminary findings. Agricultural journals began referencing Nathan Briggs' work, his theories, his observations, his decades of persistence. The man who spent years being ignored was finally being heard. I visited the memorial marker near the first blooming tree one evening. The mountain glowed gold beneath the setting sun. Shadow rested beside me, still healing, still slower than before, but alive. That was enough. I sat quietly for a long time, thinking about Nathan, thinking about Caroline, thinking about how close as I'd come to selling everything, to walking away, to missing all of this. The mountain breeze moved through the orchard. Thousands of leaves whispered overhead. For the first time in years, I felt something unexpected. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. Something steadier, something stronger. Peace. The war against Victor Hale was over. The truth had finally surfaced. The orchard had survived. Shadow had survived. And for the first time since arriving in Silver Ridge, the future felt bigger than the past. But one final decision still waited. A decision that would determine what Nathan Briggs truly intended when he left me this mountain. Because maybe the orchard had never been about peaches. Maybe it had never been about water. Maybe it had never been about land at all. Maybe Nathan had been trying to build something far more valuable. And I was finally beginning to understand what it was. The realization came quietly. Not during the fire. Not during the investigation. Not during the orchard's spectacular bloom. It arrived months later, on an ordinary autumn morning. The peaches had been harvested. The crowds had thinned. The reporters had moved on to newer stories. And for the first time since arriving in Silver Ridge, the mountain felt peaceful. I sat on the farmhouse porch, watching the sunrise. Shadow rested beside my chair. The old German shepherd's muzzle had turned almost completely white. His burns had healed. The scars remained. But then again, scars had never bothered either of us. The orchard stretched across the hillside below. Golden leaves shimmered in the morning light. The sight still amazed me, not because it was beautiful, because it existed at all. A year earlier, people laughed at this mountain. Laughed at Nathan, laughed at me now. Visitors traveled across the state just to see it. The irony made me smile. A pickup truck rolled slowly up the driveway. Then another. Then another. The visitors weren't tourists. They were veterans. The first was a former Marine named Daniel. The second was an Army medic named Sarah. The third had served in the Air Force. Each carried the same invisible burden. Possid loss, isolation. The feeling that somehow life had continued moving while they remained stuck in place. I recognized it immediately because I had lived it. For years, the idea started accidentally. Grace had suggested it months earlier. One conversation over coffee. One simple observation. You seem different around other veterans. At first, I dismissed it. Then I thought about it. Then I couldn't stop thinking about it. Eventually, I invited a few struggling veterans to visit the orchard. No speeches, no therapy sessions, no grand plans, just work, soil, fresh air, purpose. The results surprised everyone, especially me. People changed here, slowly. The same way the orchard changed. Not overnight, not dramatically. One day at a time. One conversation at a time. One small victory at a time. The mountain did something modern life often failed to do. It created space. Space to breathe. Space to heal. Space to remember who you were before pain convinced you otherwise. Within 2 years, the program grew beyond anything I imagined. Veterans arrived from across Colorado, then neighboring states. Some stayed a weekend, some stayed months, a few never left. The old farmhouse expanded. Additional cabins appeared. Workshops, gardens, walking trails, everything grew organically. Just like Nathan's orchard. Just like the root system beneath it. One connection leading to another. one person helping another, one life rebuilding another. The mountain became a refuge. A place where broken people stopped pretending they weren't hurting. A place where they discovered healing wasn't weakness. A place where purpose returned. Sometimes through work, sometimes through friendship, sometimes through a stubborn old dog who refused to leave their side. Because Shadow became something unexpected, a legend. Veterans arriving at the orchard often heard about him before they met him. The retired military K9 who discovered Nathan's letters. The dog who found the hidden journals. The dog who saved trapped researchers during the fire. The dog who refused to quit. Many visitors connected with Shadow immediately, maybe because they saw themselves in him. Older, scarred, carrying injuries nobody fully understood, still moving forward anyway. The dog never seemed to mind the attention. He accepted scratches, accepted treats, accepted admiration, then returned to his favorite spot beneath the first tree that bloomed, as if reminding everyone who the real hero was. Nathan Briggs. We placed a memorial there 5 years after the fire. Nothing elaborate. A simple stone marker, a bronze plaque, and one sentence: Nathan Briggs. He taught us that what appears dead may only be preparing to bloom. The dedication ceremony drew hundreds of people. Researchers attended, farmers attended, veterans attended, families attended. Even Grace cried, though she'd deny it if asked. I stood before the crowd that day, looking across the orchard, looking across the mountain, looking across a life I never expected to have. Then I looked at Nathan's memorial and finally understood. Nathan never intended to leave me wealth, never intended to leave me a business, never intended to leave me valuable land. Those things were secondary. The orchard was simply the vehicle. The real inheritance was purpose. The thing I lost after Caroline died. The thing PTSD nearly destroyed. The thing homelessness buried beneath years of grief. Nathan saw it before I did. Maybe that's why he never stopped writing. Maybe that's why he trusted Shadow. Maybe that's why he left everything to a broken old seal, living out of a truck. Because he knew purpose can't be handed to someone. It has to be discovered. The same way roots discover water. The same way blossoms discover sunlight. The same way people discover hope. Years passed. The orchard continued thriving. Researchers still visited. New studies emerged. Nathan's journals became required reading in several agricultural programs. His theories influenced modern farming techniques. The man once dismissed as a fool became respected nationwide. I wished he could have seen that, but perhaps in some way he did. One spring morning, nearly a decade after I first arrived, I found myself walking slowly through the orchard. Shadow moved beside me, much slower now. His hips bothered him. His hearing wasn't what it used to be. Neither was mine. Age catches everyone eventually. The first blooming tree stood ahead, still healthy, still strong, still producing fruit. Beneath it sat a young veteran named Luke, 26 years old, recently discharged, struggling, searching. The same way I once had, he was kneeling in the dirt, studying the ground, listening. The sight made me smile. I walked closer. "What are you doing?" Luke glanced up, then looked back toward the soil. "Listening." I laughed. "To what?" He smiled. "The roots." The answer stopped me. Because decades earlier, Nathan Briggs had written something similar. Years later, Grace told me the same story, and now another generation carried it forward. Luke shrugged. "I know it sounds crazy." "No." I looked across the orchard, across the mountain, across the lives rebuilt here. It doesn't. For a while we sat together beneath the tree. The breeze moved through the branches overhead. Birds called from distant hillsides. The orchard hummed softly with life. Then Luke spoke again. "You really think they never stop growing?" I looked down at Shadow. The old dog rested beside my chair, eyes closed, peaceful, content. Then I looked toward the mountain, toward Nathan's memorial, toward the orchard, toward the veterans working among the trees. "No," I smiled. "They never stop." The sun climbed higher. Golden light spilled across the blossoms, across the cabins, across the orchard, across the people who came here believing they were broken. only to discover they were still growing, just beneath the surface, like roots, like hope, like purpose. And as the day began, Shadow lifted his head one final time and looked across the mountain he helped save. The same mountain where a homeless veteran once arrived, believing his life was over. The same mountain where a loyal K9 uncovered the truth. The same mountain where dead trees bloomed, and where broken people learned how to live again. The orchard never saved me because it became valuable. The orchard saved me because it gave me a reason to keep going, a reason to wake up, a reason to believe. And the first one who saw that future was a faithful German shepherd who never stopped believing in his partner. As the blossoms swayed beneath the Colorado sky, veterans laughed together among the trees. The mountain glowed with life. The orchard flourished. And beside me, Shadow rested peacefully. Mission complete. If you believe loyalty, patience, and doing the right thing still matter, comment yes below. And if you've ever gone through a season where life knocked you down, but you refused to quit, I'd love to hear your story. Remember, some of the best things in life take time to bloom. Subscribe and join us for more stories about justice, perseverance, and second chances in the land of the free.